The night air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant hum of crickets. A sleek black car rolled down the deserted road near the military compound, its headlights slicing through the fog. Then, a sudden blur, a growl, a flash of fangs. The millionaire barely had time to react. The road stretched endlessly before him, a narrow strip of asphalt cutting through the dense forest that flanked the military compound. Vincent Langford sat behind the wheel of his luxury sedan, the purr of the engine barely registering in his mind. He was a man who had conquered the world, a self-made millionaire whose name carried weight in the highest circles of power and prestige. Yet, for all his wealth, there was an emptiness inside him, a hollow ache that no amount of money could fill. He checked the time on his Rolex. Midnight. The world beyond the windshield was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the cold night breeze. His mind wandered, as it often did these days, to the past, to the things he had lost, the choices he could not take back. The weight of regret was suffocating. On the seat beside him lay an old pocket watch, its golden surface worn with age, the once engraved initials barely visible. It had belonged to his father, a man he had spent his entire life trying to impress. But now, with his father gone and his success cemented in the annals of business history, Vincent found himself questioning what it had all been for. The victories felt empty, the applause hollow. The compound loomed ahead, an imposing structure of steel and concrete hidden behind towering barbed wire fences. He had heard rumors about this place: military experiments, classified projects, secrets buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. None of it concerned him. It was merely a shortcut on his journey, an insignificant detour, or so he thought. As he drove past, something shifted in the shadows. A flicker of movement. Vincent's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. For a moment, there was nothing, just the quiet, moonlit road behind him. Then, a low growl rumbled through the night, deep and guttural, like a warning from the darkness itself. A chill crept up his spine. He told himself it was nothing, just the wind, just the night playing tricks on his mind. But deep down, an unshakable unease settled into his bones. Something was out there. Vincent forced a breath through his nostrils, shaking off the discomfort clawing at his chest. He had faced boardrooms full of wolves in suits, had stared down ruthless competitors who would sell their souls for a fraction of his fortune. Fear was a foreign concept to him, and yet, the night felt different. He pressed his foot on the accelerator, eager to put distance between himself and whatever unseen force lurked in the periphery. The road narrowed, swallowed by overhanging branches, the military compound fading into the background. The pocket watch on the seat beside him glinted under the dim interior light, a whisper from the past. He remembered the last time his father had held it, the way his aged fingers had traced the edges, his voice trembling as he spoke of time slipping away. Lost in thought, Vincent barely noticed the shadow darting across the road. By the time his instincts kicked in, it was too late. A massive shape lunged into his path, a flash of muscle and fur. His hands jerked the wheel, tires screeching against the asphalt. The world spun as the car veered off the road, crashing into the ditch with a bone-jarring impact. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the growl returned, closer this time, vibrating through the very air around him. Vincent groaned, pain lacing his ribs as he struggled to move. The windshield was cracked, the front of the car crumpled, steam rising into the frigid night. He turned his head, and his breath hitched. Eyes, yellow and unblinking, watching him from the darkness. The German Shepherd stood at the edge of the broken road, its silhouette massive against the backdrop of trees. Its ears were pinned back, its body rigid, its gaze locked onto him with a predatory intensity. Vincent's pulse pounded in his ears. He had never been afraid of dogs before, but something about this creature sent a primitive warning through his veins. This was no ordinary stray. There was an intelligence in those eyes, something calculated, something lethal. Slowly, he reached for the door handle. The dog growled, a deep, resonant sound that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He froze, his body tense, his breath shallow. This wasn't just an accident. He wasn't just a traveler on a lonely road. He was prey. And the hunt had begun. Vincent's breath came in short gasps as he kept his body still, his mind racing for a plan. The German Shepherd didn't move, but its unwavering stare sent an unspoken message: one wrong move and it would strike. He needed to get out of the car, but the creature's presence turned the simple act into a game of survival. The silence was unbearable. The only sound was the distant rustling of leaves, the whisper of wind through the trees. The compound was out of sight now, hidden behind the thick forest lining the road, and Vincent realized no one knew where he was. He was alone. Slowly, he shifted his weight, testing his body. His ribs ached, a sharp pain shooting through his side with every breath. He needed to move fast. The car was useless now, a wreck of shattered glass and twisted metal. His only hope was getting to the road and finding help. But the dog. It lowered its head, muscles rippling beneath its sleek coat, its stance that of a predator moments before a kill. Vincent's mind screamed at him to run, but he knew better. Running would only trigger its instinct to chase, to bring him down like wounded prey. Instead, he took a slow breath, easing his fingers away from the door handle. If he was going to make it out alive, he had to be smart. His eyes flicked toward the trees. If he could make it to the forest, he might have a chance. The darkness could provide some cover, a place to hide, to outmaneuver the beast. The only problem was reaching it without provoking an attack. Vincent's fingers curled into a fist. He had built an empire from the ground up, had fought against impossible odds to stand where he was today. He refused to let an animal decide his fate. With deliberate control, he took his chance. And then, the night erupted into chaos. Vincent flung the door open and lunged out, rolling onto the damp earth just as the German Shepherd sprang forward. The beast's jaws snapped inches from his leg, teeth flashing under the pale moonlight. He scrambled to his feet, heart hammering, and bolted toward the tree line. Twigs snapped beneath his weight, branches clawing at his clothes as he plunged into the forest's darkness. Behind him, the dog pursued, its powerful strides closing the gap. The night was alive with the sounds of the chase, the heavy panting of the predator, the rustling of undergrowth, Vincent's own ragged breaths. His only hope was to outmaneuver it, to lose it in the maze of trees before exhaustion claimed him. The forest closed in around Vincent, like a living entity, branches clawing at his suit, damp earth sinking beneath his frantic steps. Behind him, the beast pursued, relentless and swift, its snarls growing sharper, more determined. He had faced adversaries in the business world, cutthroat rivals who would bleed him dry if given the chance, but nothing compared to the primal fear that now gripped him. This was survival in its purest form. He dodged a low-hanging branch, the snap of twigs beneath his shoes echoing louder than he wished. His lungs burned, every breath a struggle against the dense air of the wilderness. His body screamed at him to stop, but the moment he hesitated, he knew it would be over. A glint of something metallic caught his eye in the moonlight, a rusted wire fence, partially obscured by wild overgrowth. Salvation? He sprinted toward it, heart pounding, adrenaline sharpening his focus. The fence stretched endlessly in both directions, too high to climb, the razor wire at its peak a deadly deterrent, but at its Bayesian opening, just wide enough for him to squeeze through. Vincent threw himself forward, his body scraping against the jagged edges as he forced his way under. Pain flared along his arm, but he barely registered it. On the other side, he collapsed onto the damp ground, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe he was safe. Then, a shadow loomed on the other side of the fence. The German Shepherd stood there, its yellow eyes glowing like embers in the dark. It didn't snarl or growl now. It simply watched, assessing. Vincent pushed himself up, cradling his wounded arm. His fingers came away slick with blood, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He took a step backward, then another. The dog remained still, its gaze unyielding. Why wasn't it attacking? What was it waiting for? Then came the low hum, a vibration beneath his feet. His breath hitched as he turned to face the unknown. Floodlights blazed to life, blinding him with their intensity. A sharp mechanical whir filled the air, and within seconds, figures emerged from the darkness. Soldiers. Their silhouettes stark against the harsh white light, weapons drawn, voices shouting in clipped commands. Vincent raised his hands instinctively, his mind struggling to process what was happening. His escape had led him straight into the heart of the compound. A man stepped forward, his uniform crisp, insignia gleaming under the glare. "State your name," he ordered, voice cold and practiced. Vincent swallowed hard. "Vincent Langford." The officer's expression didn't change. "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Langford." Vincent's eyes darted back to the fence. The dog was gone. A shiver ran down his spine. Had an accident. I was just trying to find help." The officer exchanged a glance with one of his men. "You were trespassing on restricted land. That makes this a problem." Vincent's gut twisted. He was no longer running from just the beast. He had stumbled into something far worse. Vincent's breath was uneven, his mind reeling as the soldiers closed in around him. The compound's floodlights bore down, illuminating his disheveled form. His expensive suit was torn, streaked with dirt and blood, a stark contrast to the rigid order of the military uniforms before him. He was used to commanding respect, to being the most powerful man in the room. Now he was just another trespasser with no leverage, no escape. A soldier yanked his arms behind his back, securing thick zip ties around his wrists. Vincent winced but didn't resist. There was no use. The officer, his face cold and unreadable, stepped closer, scrutinizing him as if he were a puzzle to be solved. "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Langford," the officer repeated, his tone even but laced with authority. "How did you get past security?" Vincent swallowed, forcing down the dryness in his throat. "I didn't get past anything. I was in an accident. He hesitated. Mentioning the dog seemed absurd. "I was looking for help." The officer's eyes flicked to one of his men, who nodded before speaking into a radio. "Check the perimeter. I want to know exactly how he got in." Vincent's heart pounded. Every second they wasted on him increased his chances of being detained indefinitely. "Look, I have no idea what this place is, and I don't care. If you let me go, I'll pretend I never saw any of this." The officer's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "That's not how this works, Mr. Langford." A sinking feeling settled in Vincent's gut. "So, what happens now?" "We verify your identity. Then we decide what to do with you." That didn't sound reassuring. Vincent had spent years cutting deals, reading people, understanding their motives. This man wasn't bluffing, and he wasn't interested in negotiation. Before Vincent could protest, another soldier approached, his face grim. "Sir, we found tracks. Something large, possibly canine, followed him through the woods." Vincent's stomach tightened. The dog. It had been right there, watching him before vanishing into the night. The officer's expression darkened. He turned back to Vincent, his eyes narrowing. "Did you see anything unusual out there?" Vincent hesitated. Admitting that a massive German shepherd had been stalking him didn't seem like a good idea, but lying wouldn't help either. "There was a dog," he said carefully. "A big one. It chased me through the forest." The silence that followed was heavy. Soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. The officer's expression became unreadable. "That's impossible," one of the soldiers muttered. "The subjects were secured." "Subjects?" Vincent's blood ran cold. "What exactly is this place?" The officer exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Take him inside." Vincent struggled as they hauled him toward the looming compound. His instincts screamed that he was walking into something far worse than a simple detention. And somewhere in the shadows he knew the dog was still watching, waiting. The steel doors slammed shut behind Vincent, the echoing clang reverberating through the dimly lit corridor. He stood motionless, his breath shallow, every muscle in his body tense. The stale air of the underground facility carried a scent of antiseptic and something else, something metallic, something raw. It was the smell of secrets buried beneath layers of concrete and protocol. A soldier pushed him forward, guiding him deeper into the compound. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Vincent's mind reeled. He had spent his life mastering control, but here he had none. Whatever lay ahead was beyond negotiation, beyond reason. They turned a corner and entered a small, sterile interrogation room. A single metal chair and table sat under the harsh glow of an overhead lamp. The soldier motioned for Vincent to sit. He obeyed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Moments later, the officer who had detained him entered, his boots clicking against the cold floor. "Mr. Langford," the officer said, lowering himself into the chair across from Vincent. "You're in a precarious position." Vincent exhaled sharply. "I gathered that much." The officer studied him for a long moment. "You say you saw a dog?" Vincent hesitated, then nodded. "It wasn't normal. It was hunting me." The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. "That wasn't just a dog." Vincent's pulse quickened. "Then what was it?" The officer's gaze flickered to the mirrored window behind Vincent. A silent exchange passed between the unseen observers. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You've stumbled into something you weren't supposed to see." Vincent forced himself to maintain eye contact. "Then tell me what I saw." A heavy silence filled the room. Then, the officer sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "The military has been working on classified projects, enhanced security measures, biological modifications." Vincent's stomach twisted. "You mean experiments?" The officer nodded grimly. "That dog what you saw was one of them, designed for war, for tracking, for killing." A cold sweat broke out along Vincent's spine. "And it got loose?" The officer leaned back. "It's not the first time." Vincent's mind spun. He had built empires, acquired secrets worth millions, but none of them had prepared him for this. The thought of a weaponized creature, unleashed and unaccounted for, sent a new wave of terror coursing through him. Before he could respond, a distant alarm blared through the facility. The officer stiffened, his hand going to his radio. "We have a breach," a voice crackled over the speakers. Vincent's blood turned to ice. He didn't need to ask what had breached the compound. The beast had come for him. The wailing alarm sent a ripple of urgency through the compound. Soldiers scrambled, boots pounding against the steel floors as red warning lights cast long, flickering shadows. Vincent remained frozen in his chair, his mind racing. He had been a captive of circumstance, but now he understood the stakes. This was not just a game of power, it was survival. The officer snapped into action, barking orders into his radio. "Lock down all exits. Contain the breach at all costs." His men obeyed, fanning out through the halls. But Vincent knew better. He had seen the intelligence in the beast's eyes. It wasn't just a creature, it was a calculated predator, bred for war, trained to outmaneuver even the best defenses. The officer turned his sharp gaze back to Vincent. "You stay here. Do not move." Vincent's mind screamed against the command. "You don't understand," he countered, his voice eerily calm. "That thing isn't just a stray experiment. It came for me. It's been following me since the crash." The officer stiffened. "Why?" Vincent swallowed hard. "Because it knows I don't belong here, and neither does it." Before the officer could process his words, the lights flickered again, and the room was plunged into momentary darkness. A guttural growl reverberated through the walls, sending shivers down Vincent's spine. The air grew thick with an unseen presence zone that was closing in. A deafening crash shattered the tense silence. The steel door bent inward with a screech, as if something immense had thrown itself against it. The officer instinctively reached for his weapon. Vincent's pulse pounded in his ears. They had minutes, maybe seconds. With another explosive impact, the door gave way, torn from its hinges. A cloud of dust filled the air as the beast emerged from the darkness. Its yellow eyes burned like molten gold, scanning the room before locking onto Vincent. Its breath came in heavy, controlled bursts, its massive form sleek yet brimming with untamed power. The soldiers outside opened fire, the rapid bursts of gunfire echoing down the halls. The beast flinched but did not retreat. Instead, it leaped forward with terrifying agility, landing squarely between Vincent and the exit. The officer barely had time to react before the creature lashed out, swiping a soldier clear off his feet and sending him crashing against the far wall. Chaos erupted. The officer fired, but the beast moved too fast, dodging the bullets with unnatural precision. Vincent took his chance. His instincts screamed for him to run, and he did, diving toward the shattered doorframe just as the beast lunged again. The officer's strangled shout was drowned beneath another sickening crunch of bone. Vincent stumbled through the corridor, his mind singularly focused on escape. but the pounding of massive paws behind him signaled the inevitable. The hunt was still on. Vincent's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted down the dimly lit corridor, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The warning sirens wailed through the compound, an eerie symphony to the chaos unraveling behind him. He dared not look back. The beast was close, the heavy thuds of its powerful limbs reverberating through the floor. A sudden burst of gunfire echoed from a distant hall. The soldiers were still trying to contain it, but Vincent knew it was futile. Bullets wouldn't stop this creature. It was something beyond human control, beyond comprehension. He skidded around a corner, nearly losing his footing, and slammed his shoulder against the wall. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself forward. A door lay ahead, heavy and reinforced an emergency containment lock. If he could get through and seal it behind him, he might have a chance. Vincent lunged for the panel beside the door, his trembling fingers flying over the keypad. His mind raced through possibilities. He had no clearance, no credentials. The beast roared behind him. With a desperate cry, Vincent slammed his palm against the emergency override. The door hissed, hydraulics releasing as it began to slide open. He threw himself inside just as the beast barreled into the closing gap, its monstrous head forcing its way through. Vincent fell backward, watching in horror as the creature clawed at the narrowing space. Its yellow eyes burned with furious intelligence, its snout twisting as it let out a guttural growl. Then, with a final ear-splitting screech, the door slammed shut. Silence. Vincent scrambled to his feet, pressing himself against the far wall. His chest heaved, his vision blurred from exhaustion. A thick, suffocating dread settled in his stomach. He wasn't safe. Not yet. The beast didn't give up. It slammed its body against the door, the reinforced metal groaning under the pressure. The entire room shuddered with each impact, dust raining from the ceiling. Vincent's mind screamed for a solution. He needed to move now. His gaze darted around the room. A control panel, a reinforced glass window overlooking a lower section of the facility. He staggered toward it, gripping the console for support. His fingers found a switch, and he hesitated only a second before flipping it. A row of overhead lights flickered to life, revealing the expanse below. What he saw stole the air from his lungs. Cages, dozens of them, lined in meticulous rows, each holding a motionless figure. Some were dogs, others were not. Twisted forms, grotesque in their modification, hybrids of muscle and machine. Vincent stumbled back. He had assumed this was one rogue experiment, one escaped horror. He was wrong. This was an army waiting to be unleashed. Vincent's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared down at the horrors confined below. The weight of his discovery threatened to crush him. He had stumbled upon something far worse than a rogue experiment. This was a breeding ground for destruction. An army of engineered monsters, locked away, waiting for orders to be unleashed upon the world. The reinforced glass vibrated as another impact slammed against the door behind him. The beast was relentless, its fury unchecked. The entire room trembled, dust cascading from the ceiling as the metal frame began to bend under the force. He had seconds, maybe less. His gaze snapped back to the control panel. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the myriad of buttons and switches. There had to be a fail-safe, something to contain or destroy this madness before it was too late. His eyes darted over the labels, searching frantically. His breath caught. That was it. He reached out, but before his fingers could make contact, a voice crackled over the facility's intercom. "Mr. Langford, step away from the controls." Vincent's blood ran cold. He turned slowly, his gaze landing on a viewing platform high above the chamber. A shadowed figure stood behind the thick glass, watching him with cold amusement. A woman, clad in a pristine military uniform, her face expressionless yet exuding a quiet menace. "I have to say, you've proven far more resourceful than expected," she continued, her voice smooth and detached. "But you're interfering in matters beyond your comprehension." Vincent's jaw clenched. "You think I'm just going to stand here and let this happen?" She tilted her head, considering him. "You misunderstand, Mr. Langford. This isn't your choice to make." A shudder ran through the room as the beast outside howled, ramming into the door again. Vincent glanced toward it, then back at the woman. He wasn't going to win this with words. His hand shot out, slamming against the containment lockdown switch. Instantly, klaxons blared through the facility. Red lights flashed, and deep metallic groans echoed as massive steel barriers began descending over the cages below. The woman's expression darkened. "You fool." Vincent didn't wait for her to react. He sprinted toward the emergency exit as the beast finally broke through, the heavy door screeching as it was torn from its frame. The creature charged inside, but Vincent was already diving through the doorway, tumbling into another corridor just as reinforced barriers slammed down behind him. He ran. The alarms intensified as the facility began locking down. He could hear the soldiers shouting, their footsteps a chaotic stampede as they scrambled to regain control. Vincent had no intention of sticking around to see how it ended. His only goal was escape. Bursting through a final door, he found himself outside. The night air hit him like a wave of cold relief. The compound stretched out before him, fences, watchtowers, and beyond them the forest. Freedom. With one last glance at the nightmare he was leaving behind, Vincent ran, disappearing into the darkness before anyone could stop him. As Vincent vanishes into the depths of the unknown, we're left with a chilling question: what happens next? The horrors lurking in that facility remain, waiting for the right moment to rise again. What would you do if faced with the truth of such an experiment? Would you fight, expose it, or turn away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Your support keeps these stories alive, fueling the journey into the darkest corners of imagination.